Okay, good evening, I think. Moving along, we've got a few people here. And we get everybody's muted again for some reason. Now, I think you're all unmuted, hopefully.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and if possible, pull up your cameras if you're going to show your faces. That way I see more than the name. I see a face with the name. But if not, that's perfectly fine. We're going to go, I've got the recording going on, Susie. And then I am going to start in the kind of middle or rehash of this chapter 7 to move us forward. Because part of what we want to do is pull all these together. So one of the things I'm going to point out to all of you as we share the screen here is, remember I gave you a, there we go. In the notes that I gave you, there's a couple of graphs. And this one is about the 7 lampstands, but then the next one, which I've got here in the middle of chapter 6, or middle of chapter 6 in the notes, is the 3 series of 7s that are going to be slowly unveiled. So we've already done the 6 of the seals. And when you get to chapter 7, you have a break before you get to the 7th seal. And then if you notice on the graph again, I have a break with the 7 trumpets. That's coming up next. And there's also a break after the 6 trumpets. And so one of the things that's happening in this, the seals and the trumpets parallel each other. And in that first one where we encounter the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, with the first 4 of the horses, each with a different color. One of the things that we're going to find with the first 4 trumpets, the opening of the seals, we find that everything that happens there is really human actions. So things that, such as the white horse and the rider coming out, he has a crown on his head, and you can turn off the sound in my computer, on my phone here. Someone's trying to get into the class and doesn't know the code. So, okay, next, turn off the sound. Good. Okay, so the first of the seals, we're going to find much of what happens, all the bad things that are happening, and of course, in each of those, there's a quarter of the earth being destroyed, or a quarter of whatever being destroyed. But those are all human actions. So you have the rider coming out with a crown to further his victories. There's war, there's conquering, there's peace that's being taken away, there's negotiation or business that's going on to harm people. We find hunger, we find people suffering from the sword, from famine, from plague. Many of these are caused by human actions. In the set of trumpets that we're going to deal with, much of this these are the acts of God, or what we call acts of God in terms of the insurance industry. So one of the things we're going to find is that there's a huge difference. And also in the seals, when things are destroyed, it's usually a quarter of everything's destroyed. With the trumpets, since it's an act of God, it's a third of everything that's being destroyed. So one of the biggest problems with many interpreters is they make the mistake of interpreting the book as a historical series, as I mentioned. So this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, because John is presenting these visions, one after another. But think of it this way. If you go to bed and you're upset about something, you might have a dream about that. And that might bother you. Wake up in the middle of the night, and then you go back to sleep, and you might have a different dream about the same topic, because what is bothering you is still on your mind. And so it continues to plague you throughout the night. In the same way, the visions that are coming, they're running in parallel. So one is echoing the other. They're not necessarily one series and then another series, but rather it's kind of the same thing happening in both of them. The whole point of this is, of course, for the conversion of humanity. So, and when you have it so that it happens that you, in the first series of the seals, a quarter of everything gets destroyed. In the second series with the trumpets, a third of everything gets destroyed. That doesn't mean that 7/12 of everything has been destroyed, or if you add up a third and a quarter. What it basically is saying is it gets worse. So like your dream might get worse as it goes along, this is getting worse. So consider the vision. As you remember, I mentioned that we're not on a timeline, we're kind of running in loops. And so what happens is we're going to see these three sets of things happening as another set of loops, each one getting more dire, more powerful. And that, of course, helps us to understand this and not to interpret it badly. And one of the reasons I'm really concerned about interpretation is, we mentioned at the beginning of the book about the blessing to those who read it and to those who hear it. At the end of the book, there's a curse. So we don't want to, we started off with a blessing, we don't want to end up being cursed because we've misinterpreted the book. So now we're in that yellow break period between the sixth and the seventh seal when we get to chapter 7. And of course, what we have here, and we read this last week, we have two different visions. And this is, again, going to be paralleled with the trumpets. When we get to that part, we'll find there's also two more visions coming up. So, again, these two series in particular parallel each other. And so you have the vision, the first vision of the 144,000 who are sealed, and it says from every tribe of Israel. And then, of course, the second vision is the great multitude, which no one can count. So you have those two visions coming up. And that helps us to kind of see this. Now, in the interpretation of the 144,000, it seems very clear that if we just separate it or read it as it is, you've got, in a sense, 144,000 of those who are saved at this moment, not in all of history, which is, again, another bad interpretation, is to say only 144,000 are saved. But again, we noted last week that this is specifically the Jewish people being saved, and then of course you have this great multitude of others who would also be saved. And so the two, again, parallel each other. That doesn't mean that those are the only Jews that are saved, or Christians and Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and all the others get a great multitude and Jews only get 144,000. That's in terms of what we're looking at this moment. But the other, again, is if we're looking at the symbolism of the numbers themselves. So, of course, it's very clear that it's the 12 tribes of Israel. And you can take that literally if you like. But the other is to look at the 144,000, see the 12 tribes. So this is God's chosen people. So these are God's chosen people who are being saved. And 1,000 is a great number. Of course, 12,000 is to represent all of that grouping. So all of these people are being saved. And to go through each of the 12 tribes, so to include all of God's people. And even God himself recognizing, the chosen people as far as the children of Jacob. But remember, God's chosen people are not the children of Jacob. They're the children of Abraham. And Abraham had the other son who ended up being the father of the Jewish people. So immediately when the covenant is made to Abraham, it has to include Ishmael as well as Isaac. So the two of them are included. And so we talk about the 12 tribes of Israel, but we also have to consider the other tribes that are not listed there. And of course, Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. So again, we have the 12 tribes of Israel that fall under Jacob. Those are his sons. But you also have the children of Esau who become the Palestinians. So you have the Arabs and the Palestinians who are also included in this family of Abraham, if you like. So the number symbolically should represent a whole lot more. And so if we're going to look to interpret, we should look to interpret based on the number. If we want to take it literally, we can, because we haven't lost anybody because we still have this great multitude. So you have the 12 tribes. But as I mentioned, the 12 tribes are listed, of course, are the sons of Jacob. And when you get to the land of Israel, the Levites don't have any, and Joseph doesn't have any because it's his sons who become the tribe, that the names of his sons become the tribe to represent him. So I'm going to end this with just reading this last passage, because this is one of the beautiful passages. We hear this at the funeral rites a lot. So the elders speak up. One of the elders spoke up and said to me, "Who are these wearing white robes?" And I said, "My Lord, you are the one who knows." And he said, "These are the ones who have survived at the time of great distress. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." So this is, again, the great multitude of those who have followed, who have been washed, not because of their actions. They have been washed in the blood of the Lamb because Christ saves. And so his action saves all. So for this reason, and now we have a great song, for this reason they stand before God's throne and worship him day and night in his temple. The one who sits on the throne will shelter them. They will not hunger or thirst anymore, nor will the sun or any heat strike them. For the Lamb who is in the center of the throne will shepherd them. So the Lamb now becomes the shepherd and lead them to springs of life-giving water. Again, reflecting Psalm 23. And God will wipe every tear from their eyes, which is one of the great lines in Revelation, which is echoed then in the funeral liturgy in Eucharistic prayer number 3. So we've kind of ended the interlude here, but now we have one more thing before we get to that, and before we get to the seventh seal. So the 7 trumpets. When he broke open the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. So again, we have this kind of intermission here between the 6th and the 7th seal. One is there's 2 visions, but the other part of that is there's this silence, liturgical silence. Not that we have much of it here at Mercy, but that sense that there's a quiet as we worship the Lord, because we kind of fall into this sense of absolute adoration and not being able to say something. So there's this great silence in heaven. And remember, what we had before was this huge cacophony, because you had the elders and you had the living creatures, and they're all bowing down to worship the God on the throne and the Lamb. So you have all this activity.
Okay, now how do I get on there?
Welcome, Cliff.
Hi, how are you? I couldn't find you.
Okay, Cliff, we're gonna mute you now. Okay, so we've got the great vision happening, the great silence, and then 7 angels come up who stood before God. Were given 7 trumpets. So we had remember we had the 7 lampstands at the beginning, and then it became 7 angels as we got into the seals, and the vision right before the seals. And now these 7 angels are given 7 trumpets. So it's almost as if, and this happens regularly in the book of Revelation. One of the things I like about the book, and it's also frustrating about the book, is you get to the last thing, and it just opens up something else. So now we have the 7th seal being opened, and rather than really kind of telling us, all of a sudden there's more to do. Now you've got the 7 angels with 7 trumpets. And then another angel came down and stood at the altar holding a gold censer. He was given a great quantity of incense to offer, along with the prayers of all the holy ones, on the gold altar that was before the throne. So the angel who comes, and this we can read if you want as the angel who first appears to John at the beginning. He kind of makes a couple of different appearances here. It could be a separate angel. It doesn't say one or the other. But this angel comes, he's got a censer, and he's going to offer these prayers, offer the incense along with the prayers. And it's a great quantity of incense. So God's going to accept these prayers because they're being offered with the incense. So this smoke, this beautiful smell fills the heavenly palace. And notice that it's the prayers of all the holy ones. So part of what's happening here is all of us, or all those who are saved, our prayers are being heard. That's one of the things that's happening. Is kind of, this is a moment of comfort to the Christian community. Prayers will be heard. God will receive them, will accept them. On the gold altar that was before the throne, the smoke of the incense, along with the prayers of the holy ones, went up before God from the hand of the angel. So the incense and the prayers go up together, which of course is different. Remember, the other time we kind of see this imagery is in the book of Genesis, where Cain and Abel are both offering their sacrifice, and one goes up and the other one stays down. So everything is going up this time around. And this imagery of the incense we also find in Luke's gospel with Zechariah offering the incense before the altar, where he's told that he'll be the father of John the baptizer. And also we have that same image happening in Isaiah before the temple. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with burning coals from the altar, and hurled it down to the earth. There were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Now, the first interpretation of this would be to say that something went wrong or something evil is happening, because of course you have thunder, you have peals of lightning, you have peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. All of those are horrible things from our point of view. They frighten us. All of them are also simply symbols of the presence of God. When God comes down on Sinai, there is peals of thunder, rumblings, flashing of lightning, and the earthquakes. When Christ dies, the earth quakes. And, there's no rumblings, there's no flashes of lightning, but the earthquakes and this darkness that covers over. So what might frighten us in terms of just looking at it also has to kind of give us a sense that we might be frightened, but that this is a sense of God's presence coming. So these coals are being thrown down to the earth because the presence of God is now coming to the earth. Okay? So the trumpets. So the seven angels who are holding the seven trumpets, so the seal, the seventh seal is, boom, we got seven trumpets now. So we don't get to finish, we get to start anew. The seven angels who are holding the seven trumpets prepare to blow them. When the first one blew his trumpet, there came hail and fire mixed with blood, which was hurled down to the earth. A third of the land was burned up, along with a third of the trees and all green grass. Okay? So again, this sense of the hail and fire, we think about the plagues of Egypt, the hail, the fire and brimstone that comes down to the earth. You think of Sodom and Gomorrah. And again, we have this sense of destruction going on, but it's limited. So the first time around, it's a quarter. The second time around, it's a third. But it's still limited, not everything. And again, we're not adding the two together because they're not running that way. They're running in parallel. So they're reflections one of another of what is happening toward the end, in a sense. And if you want to go back for a second, when you get to that part about or when we look at the things in terms of the seals and the various things that happen with war and conquering and victories and people being slaughtered and businesses stealing from the poor and hunger and famine and plague, those things always happen. They're part and parcel of history. So to look at this and say this is the end of time, well, that's why people in every generation say these are the last days, because this is happening just like it says in the Bible, but it always happens. It always happens. And whether or not it happens to a quarter of the earth, we won't know till that particular plague or time is over. But it certainly feels like that. I mean, right now the coronavirus feels like that plague that is absorbing a quarter of all the earth, even though it's nowhere near that. So we have to look at it. But this time now, with the trumpets, we're at a third, and a third of the land, the trees, the grass is burned. So this is a third of creation, in a sense. Remember, these are the things that God first created. Second trumpet comes. The second angel blew his trumpet. Something like a large burning mountain was hurled into the sea. A third of the sea turned to blood, a third of the creatures living in the sea died, and a third of the ships were wrecked. Again, a very powerful image. And the first thing that we think of is, you know, where's he coming up with this? Well, Revelation was probably written around the year 96. Mount Vesuvius erupted in the year 79. There's a couple of historians who were there and wrote about it. Pliny the Younger, who's Pliny the Elder, died in the eruption of Vesuvius, and so his son, but also, I forgot the other guy's name. But when they talk about what happened at Vesuvius, with the sky darkening and the mountain basically exploding, and Pompeii was a seacoast town. The ash and everything and the rocks fell into the sea as well and destroyed parts of the Navy as well as the homes and everything else. So the image of the destruction, particularly for the Christians in John's time, would have sounded very much like Vesuvius is that moment when all this happens. Those who lived 100 years ago would have said Krakatoa. Maybe in these days we'd say the tsunamis that happened in, 2008 or 2011, the various tsunamis that have happened throughout the world with the earthquakes. These are all things that have had great damage. But I want to also point out that so far we've damaged the land with what's going on. So what was created, we're also damaged now the sea. And in the Bible, the sea is, what
did you say?
Remember the sea or the abyss is the waters that have to be separated in order to create the universe, or in order to create God's creation. So there's, in a sense, the great waters of the sea to the Jewish mindset, and even in the ancient world, you have this sense that there is the fresh water, the water that's good for us, and then there's this sea, this profound water that we know nothing about, that can harm us. We can navigate across the top of it, but only until, this past century have we been able to really get underneath it and see the bottom of the sea. And it's still the great undiscovered territory of the earth. But the idea was that God was holding back the waters that would destroy everything, much as in Job it says he holds back the sea in the same way. So the uncreated is also being destroyed. So everything in part of what we see in Genesis happening. So we get to the third of the trumpets. The third angel blew his trumpet. A large star burning like a torch fell from the sky. It fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs. So now we have the fresh water. So these would be the things, you remember, God planted a garden between the rivers. That's the garden, the Garden of Eden. So we talk about the fresh waters that people use to live off of, and then we have the seawater, the salt water. So now the other part of creation is being affected. And the star was called wormwood, and a third of all the water turned to wormwood. Many people died from this water because it was made bitter. The commentators say that wormwood is not something that it's not venomous in the sense that people would die from it, but it does make it bitter. And it doesn't take a lot of wormwood to, make bitter a whole bunch of water. So if people are dying from it, at least in terms of the dream, it's because there's a huge amount of it. But again, it's a third, a third, a third. Then the fourth trumpet. The fourth angel blew his trumpet. A third of the sun, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars were struck, so that a third of them became dark. So not the whole sun, just a third of the sun. Not the whole moon, just a third of the moon. And not all the stars, a third of them. And they were struck, they became dark. The day lost its light for a third of the time. And basically, so instead of having 12 hours of daylight, we now have 8 hours of daylight. Is basically how the image reads. So again, it's not that the sun was destroyed, but it was lessened. But in lessening it, you just think that the light would be weaker throughout the day, but the way the image reads is it wasn't weaker throughout the day, we lost part of the day. So there's, again, destruction of those things that are part of the created world that God created for us, okay? So the third of them became dark. The day lost its light for a third of the time, as did the night. Then I looked again and heard an eagle flying overhead cry out in a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth from the rest of the trumpet blast that the three angels are about to blow." So let's start with that. The eagle, the Greek word that is used for eagle is also can also be translated as vulture. So the word is not specifically an eagle; it's a bird of prey. And of course, whether it's an eagle or a vulture, kind of gives you a different sense of what it might forebode. So when you think of the eagle flying high, you think of this portentous symbol of power and strength somehow coming and something else happening. When you think of a vulture, you think of this portentous symbol of death flying overhead. Let me get to the next part here. Woe, woe, woe. What does that sound like? Or what's the opposite of that? Holy, holy, holy. So, and again, the Jewish people did not have a comparative language. They could not say good, better, best. They would say good, 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 good. So they didn't have this comparative language. They had a language that in order to show something increasing or worth more, it was repeated. So to repeat it 2 times is to show something is better than something else. It's a comparative in one way. To repeat it 3 times is to say it is the best. It's you know, in Spanish they have mejor and lo mejor. So, but in Hebrew it's repeated. So holy, 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 woe, woe, woe. So we have the opposite of God going on. You know, where it's holy, 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 we always look and give praise, but woe, woe, woe means that there is great travail coming upon us. The other part of that woe, woe, woe is that as we get through the next part of the book here, there's actually 3 specific woes that are listed. So it's a play on words, or you know, the phrase is meant to be a play. It's meant to, there are going to be 3 woes, but it's specifically, but it's also that sense to echo back to holy, 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 which is what the seraphim cry out when they're in the temple in Isaiah. So then the 5th angel blew his trumpet in chapter 9 now, right? 5th angel blew his trumpet. Is it okay to keep the graph up here, or do you want me to get to the scripture passage? Raise your hand if you want scripture, or keep it where it is if you want the graph up. Okay, we'll leave the graph up. Okay. Okay. So 5th trumpet, chapter 9. Then the 5th angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. So this is another star, right? It was given the key for the passage to the abyss. It opened the passage to the abyss, and smoke came up out of the passage like smoke from a huge furnace. So the abyss in Hebrew theology is really, there's one, the image of it is the sea, or the great nothingness. So when God first creates the universe, God's Spirit is hovering over the abyss, or over the chaos, over the nothingness, and then creates order from it. But by this time in history, both for Christians and even in ancient culture, but also for the Jews, the abyss also had a more specific meaning as an abode of the dead. So it was an abode of the dead, and that's actually how it was used in Jesus' time. But it even moved further on, not an abode of the dead, but by the time of Revelation, with the Christian theology moving forward, it wasn't an abode of the dead, it was an abode of the damned. Because, of course, the saved were living in heaven with Christ, whereas those who refuse Christ, the damned, would be living in the abyss, or what we might call hell. So there's it had grown in its understanding and its meaning, but the word kept being used, even though it was changing. They were kept using that same word with that sense that an abyss is something we fall into that we can't get out of because we never hit bottom. So you can't climb up because you haven't stopped falling. So it's a great image. And of course, the abyss opens, and what comes out of there is smoke, like smoke from a huge furnace. And of course, if it's the abode of the damned, you know, our theology says, well, they're all on fire, so they're all burning in hell. So that's why the smoke comes up. As soon as you open the abyss, all the smoke has to come up because it's burning down there, and it's burning up all these people. So the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke from the passage. And again, in terms of imagery, Vesuvius would have been a great image for all of that happening. Would have been a kind of a standard for John or anybody else in writing in those days to use as smoke coming up and darkening the skies. Just as Krakatoa in the 19th century darkened the skies for months, for thousands of miles, not for hundreds of miles, and even Mount St. Helen in 1980-something darkened the skies around Washington. And you know, something like Krakatoa lowered the temperature of the earth 2 degrees. So the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke from the passage. Locusts came out of the smoke onto the land, and they were given the same power as scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth. Okay, here's a problem. If you remember, with the first trumpet, the grass was burned. And in the, I think it's in the seals. Well, the grass was burned in the first trumpet, with the first trumpet, but now there's grass there not to be harmed. So it's a third of the land, the trees, and all the grass is burned. But now we have grass that's not going to be harmed. So, and this is, again, this is part of the problem of eschatological literature as opposed to theological or historical literature. So John is running these images because, again, it's a vision. He's trying to convey a vision that he had. So he's not going back and saying, oh, I can't say that. It's like, you know, Stephen King writing one of his novels would say, oh, I can't say that because I already killed off that character. Okay? John doesn't have to worry about that because it's eschatological, because it's talking about end times. That character can be back here. So even though there's no grass, there's grass now because they fall independently of each other. So the images, again, are not meant to be a series of destructions so that we can count them out and see when this happens, you know, we've gotten to this stage at the end of the world, and this happens, we get to this stage. No, they kind of pop up on us in one image after another, showing various aspects of what is happening around us, okay? So they are told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or any tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. So why locusts? Locusts specifically harm plants. They specifically eat all the green stuff around, and they don't really go after people. Well, I had a locust come after me once, but other than that, they don't normally go after people. So why the locusts? And part of that is again, if we go to Joel or one of the other prophets and they talk about the locusts or the plagues of Egypt, and they talk about the locusts, of course, all the food is being destroyed, but not the people. But here, now the people are going to do, but they're not to kill them. They're not going to kill them. They're not to harm the ones who have the seal. So the ones who have been sealed, 144,000 and the great multitude, they're not to harm them. But the others there who don't have the seal, who have not been saved in a sense, or have not gone to Christ, they are going to be stung for 5 months, which is pretty much the lifespan of a locust. So for the lifespan of the locust, they're going to come up and they're going to spend their time eating people instead of eating plants. But they're not going to harm them. They're just going to sting them and sting them and sting them like a scorpion would. Of course, if a scorpion, you know, a bigger scorpion stings you or stings you enough, the venom would kill you. But And we're not talking about killing people here. So they were not allowed to kill them, but only to torment them for 5 months. The torment they inflicted was like that of a scorpion when it stings a person. During that time, these people will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will escape them. So the torments are terrible, and people want them to end. You know, even if I have to die to get rid of this, is back in, February, when I was really sick with that cough, and I couldn't get, it's like, you know, dying isn't a bad option here. You know, as opposed to not being able to move a second without having a cough. So sometimes the torments get so bad, people just think that way. So that's how these torments are going to be, but death will escape them. The appearance of the locust, and now John does something. He's going to start describing these locusts, and they're not your regular ugly green locust grasshoppers that hop around. These guys are much uglier than that, and much more symbolic than that. So the appearance of the locust was like that of horses ready for battle. So either they're huge, or just kind of the shape reminds them that they're coming and they're moving forward. They're ready for battle. On their heads, they wore what looked like, not what were, looked like. Remember, their appearance was like horses ready for battle, like crowns of gold. So again, you know, the artists love this because they can draw these images, and these are powerful and wonderful and frightful, but they're images. And so when the theologian says God's going to come and this swarm of locusts is God's retribution against us, they're misreading or misinterpreting what the book says, because the book is meant to be an image of something. And so there can be something else that feels like the locusts attacking us or whatever. So it looked like crowns of gold, which means they had authority, right? If they have crowns on, they have authority. They're there to conquer. Their faces were like human faces. So, and they had hair like women's hair. So they have personalities. These aren't insects that we see, because most of us, if we pull two flies together or two spiders together of the same kind of spider, or same kind of fly, or same kind of locust, we're not really going to tell them apart unless we really start putting them under a microscope or magnifying glass and really start looking at them. But most of the time, we're just going to see locust, 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 and they all look the same. But these have personality because they're not really locusts. What comes out of the fires of hell? Demons. And demons are persons. They have personality. So they have faces, they have hair. Their teeth, they have teeth with like lion's teeth. So they're ferocious. But you know, they're not going to use their teeth to chew us up. But it's the fear, the ferociousness of who they are. And they had chests like iron breastplate. So they're ready for battle. They're ready to do their worst. The sound of their wings was like the sound of many horse-drawn chariots racing into battle. Unfortunately, we don't know what many horse-drawn chariots racing into battle would sound like, because we haven't had chariots in battle for a few centuries. But if you've seen a World War II movie and heard the tanks, or if you watch some news clips when the United States was first attacking Iraq, and you hear the thunder of the jets rolling over, or even here at times for the Air and Water Show, when the Thunderbirds are flying over, you can see how people be frightened by that sound coming at us. This powerful sound. We're not exactly sure where it's coming from, and it's coming very fast, and we don't know what they're going to do. We do know what they're going to do because it's the Air and Water Show, but if it were a time of war, it would be entirely different. Or if we were living in a place like the Middle East where this is happening on a regular basis, we would be terribly frightened. So like horse-drawn chariots racing into battle. They had tails like scorpions, which makes sense because they're supposed to be like scorpions. With stingers, with their tails, they had power to harm people for 5 months. They had as their king the angel of the abyss. So who's the angel of the abyss? Satan, right? Okay, they had as their king the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek, Apollyon. So let me get to that for a second here, if I can. Hold on. Let me, oh, it doesn't want to go here, okay. I'm gonna come down here to do it. So, Abaddon, that means the destroyer in Hebrew. And Apollyon, is it two P's or? No, one P, two L's. Apollyon means one who destroys. So it's the same word basically, or same idea. So the destroyer or one who destroys. So we have their king is normally we'd say their king is Satan, but again the idea behind this is that there's destruction happening. The first woe has passed, but there are two more to come. What a great thought is that, huh? Let me see if I can unmute everybody for a second. And I think I have to stop the sharing in order to find the unmute button. Yeah. And let me see if anybody has questions or whatever. So you can raise your hand or questions so far? We're good at explaining this like bam, 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 right? Everything's perfect. Makes sense? Okay. Okay, well, if there's no questions, move forward. Put you all back on mute for a second so whatever's happening at home doesn't interrupt everything else. Okay, let me go back to that share screen. Because we've only got the first woe down. We got a lot more to go. So, two more woes. Then the sixth angel blew his trumpet, and I heard a voice coming from the four horns of the gold altar before God, telling the sixth angel who held the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the banks of the great river Euphrates. So first of all, the altar, so as John continues on in describing this vision, he's also actually expanding on the vision in the center there. So now that we have the throne, we have the Lamb before the throne, we have the altar, we have the seven angels with their seven trumpets in front of that, but and the four living creatures, who are the four gospels. The altar itself not only has the incense on it, but it also has four horns on it. Okay, so kind of decorative feature at the end. So the four, coming from the four horns of the gold altar before God, telling the sixth angel who held the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the banks of the great river Euphrates. And that, I'm going to go back to the map of Rome for a second here. And so this is the Roman Empire in the at its height, basically. It got a little bit bigger, I think, once or twice, but pretty much this is the majority of the Roman Empire as it was known, particularly at the time of John writing the book of Revelation. So if you go to the far east of the empire, or what would be the far right hand, you're going to find Parthia. Outside the empire, you're going to find Assyria, Armenia, Mesopotamia. So we're all, I don't know if you can see that, we're all in this area at the far end. So you have Armenia, Mesopotamia, Parthia. So you go down at the bottom of the page, the far thing on the far right is Arabia. So the Saudi Arabia would be the country now. You see Egypt. Go to the right of all of that, and you see Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia, you see the two rivers. And the rivers they've got here are the Euphrates and the Tigris. And at this point in the empire, the rivers are both within the empire, but for much of the empire, the Euphrates was the end of the empire. And in the book of Genesis, when God promises Abraham the promised land, the land that he actually offers to Abraham goes all the way to the Euphrates. So it goes from the Great Sea, the Mediterranean, to the Euphrates, down to the Wadi of Egypt, which is the Sinai Peninsula. So that would be the land offered to Israel, which is why the Israelites today, Jewish people today, think that they should expand their country to include what was promised to them by God to Abraham. But also the Euphrates River is the boundary where all the bad things come to the Jewish people. So remember, Assyria is on the other side of the Tigris, up kind of wedged in between Armenia and Parthia, and just to the right of Mesopotamia. It's part of Mesopotamia, but it's there on the other side of the Tigris. And then, of course, you have Babylon, the last city mentioned at the very bottom right of the map. And that sits on the edge of the Euphrates River, but on the east side of the Euphrates River. So the Euphrates River would have been the end of what should have been the land of Abraham, but all the people who came to conquer them, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and then, of course, later the Persians, all came from across the Euphrates. So that's the end of the empire, and that's also the end of what should be historically their land, or by promise should be their land, and all the danger comes from that side. So you've got the four angels at the Euphrates, in a sense, ready to attack. Now, Parthia, the land that's there now, that's not in the empire, was which would be part of Iran as of today, it's Persia today. The people there were known to be particularly ferocious, and so the Romans tried to keep the empire safe, but the Parthians also used large war horses, just like as the Romans did, but all of their soldiers were cavalry, as opposed to the majority of the Roman soldiers being foot soldiers. And they had huge cavalry that would come in and make raids. And so again, part of what's going on here could be a reflection of, a sense of real fear of people in the Middle East, Christians living in the Middle East, or anyone living in the Middle East at that time, even in the empire. It could be from experience, because Parthians made regular raids into the empire to steal things and then go back. Or it could just be that sense of overall fear. But so the symbolism is the Euphrates River because it's symbolic. It's symbolic because of the end of the promised land to Abraham. It's symbolic because of the conquest that came from across the Euphrates. And of course, as I said, Babylon sits right on there. And Babylon is always used in the book of Revelation as that great power that is against God. But actually, when John talks about Babylon, he's really referring to Rome. He's not referring to the city of Babylon, because by that time, they had been conquered so many times between the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans that was not a great, powerful city anymore. It was still a city, but it did not have the same weight as it once did. So John really is referring to Rome when he talks about Babylon, although some of the evangelical interpreters, and I don't want to say evangelical because they're evangelical Christians, or let's just say some of the non-Catholic interpreters of Revelation will use that and say Babylon is the Catholic Church. Because when they talk about the horror of Babylon, they talk about all the evils. They want to talk about the bad things in the Catholic Church, which allows them to exist as a church, because we have to be wrong for them to exist. Otherwise, there's no reason for them. So, but that's where we're at in terms of the image. Go back to our PowerPoint here. So release the four angels. So the four angels were released who were prepared for this hour, day, month, and year to kill a third of the human race. So Now again, so whether we're talking about an invasion from the Parthians or we're talking about the end of time, we've now upped the stakes. You know, the locusts weren't allowed to kill anybody, but now the 4 angels are going to come and kill a third of the human race. And of course, how is it going to be done? The number of cavalry troops was 200 million. I heard their number. So in Greek, the largest number in Greek is a myriad. And a myriad represents 10,000. So 200 million would be a myriad of myriads, a myriad times a myriad, and double it. So when you talk about it, so if they're writing this number, that's how we know what the number is in English, because it would be a myriad of myriads doubled. So we're talking on a number of soldiers so large that there's no word to describe it, is what it comes down to. Now in my vision, this is how I saw the horses and their riders. So again, he's going to now, just as he described the locusts, now he's going to describe the horses and the riders who are going to bring this destruction. And again, they are frightening. And this is why people get frightened in the book of Revelation, because you get these kinds of descriptions here. So they wore red, blue, and yellow breastplates. And I have some challenge to the word blue because the word can be interpreted any number of ways. In Spanish, it's interpreted as jacinto, which is the color of hyacinth, so kind of a bluish purple. And elsewhere in English translations, it's interpreted as sapphire, which again can be a blue. But the idea is that this is meant to be a smoky blue. So what's happening is when you have the red, you're talking about fire. When you have the blue, you're talking about smoke. So whether you call it sapphire, jacinto, hyacinth, you know, the idea is it's supposed to represent the smoke. And then the yellow is supposed to represent the sulfur. So we have fire and sulfur and smoke that is going to come from them. Red, blue, and yellow breastplates, and the horses' heads were like heads of lions. So again, we had the teeth of lions from the locusts. Now we have the heads of lions from the horses. And again, it's great artistry, great symbolism, and the ferociousness of it. But they're horses, so they're going to run fast and run for a long time and carry a rider. Out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and sulfur, the 3 things that echo the breastplate colors. But you notice they're not coming from the riders, they're coming from the horses' mouths, okay? For the power of the horses is in their mouths and in their tails. Well, now I have to tell you what the tails are like, because they have power too, right? Because the horse is always swishing its tail to swatted flies. So the power of the horse is in their mouths and in their tails. For their tails are like snakes with heads that inflict harm. So now you have horses whose tails are like snakes, like Medea's head, or Medusa's head. You got the tails are snakes with snakes' heads on them, and they're inflicting harm. So now we have scorpions and serpents, right? Remember that line in the gospel? I give you the power to tread on scorpions and serpents and all the forces of the enemy. So here are all the forces of the enemy being battled about before us, coming up to us. And so this is the point where we're either going to fall down in fear because these things are frightening, or we're going to remember that line of Jesus that says, I give you power to tread on scorpions and serpents and all the powers of the enemy. And remember that we as believers have the power to conquer all of that. So, their tails like snakes with heads that inflict harm. The rest of the human race, who were not killed by these plagues, did not repent of the works of their hands. So the plagues they're talking about is the sulfur and fire, sulfur, and brimstone that comes down from heaven, or comes out of the mouths of the horses. Those who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands. So the whole point of this is to call people to repentance. And of course, what we're finding is that those who are killed and part of this is, you know, we're finding, and this is hard when we see it the book of Joshua and the books of the Judges and the books of Samuel, in the conquest of the Holy Land, we have a lot of battles, we have a lot of killing going on, and people get upset about that. And here we have also a lot of killing going on, and we say, well, wait, how can our good and loving God cause the death of all these people? But again, these are the people who refuse to acknowledge God, refuse to repent. And not acknowledge in the sense of, oh, well, he's got to be God, but to truly understand what that means to call him God. And I can get back to that in a minute. So they did not repent of the works of their hands. So not of their evil, but of what they're doing. And what's the works of their hands? Well, to give up the worship of demons and idols. So the people who have turned to demons and idols, and we see that a lot in our society. I mean, we've seen over the years, it seems, and it could get worse, obviously, over the years. But worship of demons and idols, and then John goes into deep detail on this to kind of show us how important it is to repent, but also how foolish it is to worship demons and idols. So he says, made from gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood. So the things that we're worshiping are just, they're the things of earth. You know, some of them we consider precious, some of them are just useful, but they're just things on earth. Gold, silver, bronze, wood, stone, which cannot see or hear or walk. They're lifeless. They can do nothing. We can make them, we can worship them, but they can do nothing. So John is calling us to see how foolish, how powerfully foolish and awfully sinful it is to put our trust, our faith, our hope in this that's really of our own making, that can't do anything, as opposed to God, who can do everything. Nor did they repent of their murders, their magic potions, their unchastity, or their robberies. So murders, the magic potions, the Greek word is pharmaka, which we would get the word pharmacy or pharmaceuticals from, okay? And pharmaka is basically drugs, but they can be drugs that are good or bad, okay? And so you're sick, you go to the doctor, you get a drug that's good for you. The number of people who get themselves addicted to drugs that are not good for them. And because they're trying to escape their own lives and live in a drug-induced world or a drug-induced life that is not in touch with reality. So they're trying to avoid themselves and life itself. Or they, people go to, when I went to Sedona, Arizona a few years ago, they have a number of crystal stores. So, and you go to the crystal store and they have all kinds of rock, is what it is. They're rocks. So they have all these rocks in the store, which you have to pay a lot of money for if you want one. But they tell you exactly, if you have this rock, you're going to have peace and calm. If you have this rock, you're going to have strength and energy. You have this rock. And so this rock is supposed to do all this for me. And people believe that. And people go after that with all their hearts. And, you get to places like Sedona, and that's kind of big business for them. But there's also, you go down Kenzie, you get a couple of botanicas, and they do the same thing there. Or you have other places where they have the tarot readers and things like that. All kinds of places where they put their faith in inanimate objects. They put their faith in rocks and stones and whatnot, as opposed to that which is living. Remember, I am who am. So, nor do they repent of their murders, which of course are evil, magic potions, which the Greek is they're drugs or anything that, and again, when we translate as magic potions, is to give that pejorative sense that the drugs that are trying to take us away from something or trying to help us gain an advantage over others. So again, in a botanica, you can find a potion to make someone fall in love with you, or you can find a potion in order to find somebody, you know, in order to cast revenge upon somebody, almost like the voodoo. So, you know, that's they translated from the pharmaca to magic potions to give it that pejorative sense. But the word itself was, it was used both ways in the time of John in Greek. And then their unchastity, and again, the Greek word is porneia, which is our word for pornography. And porneia in Greek was actually, it was actually a prostitute. So the pornography is a picture of a prostitute or anything, but they used it in the sense to show any kind of sexual immorality. So in English, in the New American Bible, we clean it up so you don't have to hear the word sex, you don't have to hear the word pornography, you don't have to hear any of that, you just say unchastity. So it's all cleaned up and sounds nice, but the Greek word was actually stronger than that unchastity thing. Any kind of sexual sin, any kind of sexual immorality, or their robberies. So you have three of them that come from the commandments: murder, adultery, or sexual immorality, and robbery, theft, and then or stealing. And then you have the other one thrown into the magic potions, which really is a form of idolatry, to worship something other than God. So that gets us through. We got the sixth trumpet, and we'll keep going, right? So now I've got the angel with the small scroll. So again, we're going to take that break a second, and there's going to be, where there were two things before, there's going to be two things again here. So first, then I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, wrapped in a cloud, with a halo around his head. His face was like the sun, and his feet were like pillars of fire. In his hand he held a small scroll that had been opened. So, the common interpretation for this is he's an archangel. He's one of the four who stand before God, or the seven who stand before God as an archangel, face like the sun, feet like pillars of fire. He held a small scroll that had been opened. And so then there's a question some scholars have as to, is this the scroll that the Lamb opened the seven seals on, and we haven't read it yet? Okay, because remember, they had the scroll, and it had seven seals. We got to the seven seals, but we didn't read the scroll. So is that this scroll, or is this another scroll? Because it says it's a small scroll. And the commentator I was reading today mentioned that the two words, biblion and biblionica, in Greek at the time of John were used interchangeably. So the biblionica means the small scroll, the biblion means the scroll, but they were kind of used interchangeably. So that person's point of view is that, of course, it is the same, but some scholars would call question into that because it uses a different word to describe it. So the small scroll that had been opened. He placed his right foot on the sea, his left foot on the land. Now, when I'm working with a youth group, Annie has a game that they call Mar y Tierra, so land and sea, or sea and land. And that is, you have to have your feet on each side of a line, and then you have to figure out, does this belong in the water, or does this belong in the land? And you have to jump over, and whoever's last loses that ground, and then they keep going until you have a winner. So you have this idea, but you also have the idea of the angel crossing over everything, his power over it all, land and sea. So he stands above it all. And then he cried out in a loud voice as a lion roars. When he cried out, the seven thunders raised their voices too. When the seven thunders had spoken, I was about to write it down. So he's got the seven thunders, which presumably is they're crying out what is on the scroll. I was about to write it down, but I heard a voice from heaven say, seal up what the seven thunders have spoken, but do not write it down. So now we're not going to get to know this, unfortunately. We don't know what it is. Then the angel I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven and swore by the one who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and earth, and sea and all that is in them, in case we missed all that, there shall be no more delay. So now something portentous is happening, and what is that? At the time when you hear the seventh angel blow his trumpet, the mysterious plan of God shall be fulfilled, as he promised to his servants, the prophets. So he's saying, okay, this is it, the end. So remember there was a half hour of silence, and now this one's in the kind of parallel but opposite. There'll be no more delay. But we obviously delayed a little bit, but the rain is coming. The plan of God is going to be fulfilled. Then the voice that I had heard from heaven spoke to me again and said, go take the scroll that lies open in the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land. So I went up to the angel and told him to give me the small scroll. So in a sense, it's a continuing vision, but it's continuing this. There's a second thing coming up here before we get to the seventh trumpet. Continuing on the vision, but kind of moving more to it. So I went up and took it. He said to me, take and swallow it. It will turn your stomach sour, but in your mouth, it will taste as sweet as honey. I took the small scroll. Doesn't that sound appetizing? Okay, it'll taste like sweet as honey, but it'll turn your stomach sour. You know, I would think you'd say, okay, no, I won't bother. But anyway, like Jeremiah, he's going to eat the scroll anyway. So I took the small scroll from the angel's hand and swallowed it. In my mouth, it was like sweet honey. But when I had eaten it, my stomach turned sour. Then someone said to me, you must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings. Again, look at this phrase carefully. It says, you must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings. Not a new prophecy, or if you want to call it a new prophecy of an old group. The prophecy was about all of these people before, and we're just going to repeat it. So remember I said things are running in parallel? So we're not going in a straight line, but rather we loop back around. That's exactly what he's telling us. He's informing us. That's how we're doing it. Then it's chapter 11 now. Yeah, I'm sorry. I want to make sure that we're supposed to be at chapter 11. Okay, then I was given a measuring rod like a staff and was told, come and measure the temple of God and the altar and count those who are worshiping in it. So this is the second vision. Remember, there are two visions. There are two visions after the seals, after the sixth seal. There are two visions after the sixth trumpet. So the second vision, I was given a measuring rod like a staff and was told, come and measure the temple of God and the altar and count those who are worshiping in it. But exclude the outer court of the temple. Do not measure it, for it has been handed over to the Gentiles, who will trample the holy city for 42 months. So the temple, and actually the Temple of Solomon or the Temple of Herod or the temples of Egypt were all kind of built in the same fashion, or even our temples, our churches are all built in the same fashion. There's in a sense, the holy place. The Hebrew, the Holy of Holies, where the holy stuff goes on, where the altar is. And then there's where the congregation sits. So there's a Holy of Holies, there's a holy place where the believers sit. And of course, that for us is inside the church. We don't have much of a narthex or vestibule, but in other temples, there are larger vestibule or waiting areas. So then, and of course, you have the place where the people, the believers sit. And in some mosques and in some temples, of course, there's the place for the men and the place for the women. And then you have another court where the non-believers are allowed to go. Okay? The outer court or the outer temple in Jerusalem, the courtyard, in effect. So they're allowed to go there, but they're not allowed to go inside. You go to Jerusalem, you go to a mosque, you're not allowed to go inside if you want to keep your shoes on. You got to follow the rules. Put your head cover on, in a synagogue. So that's part of what's going on. So there's those who don't believe, they stay out here. Those who do believe, they come in to pray. And of course, then you have the people who offer the worship. Okay. And they'll be given power to trample the holy city for 42 months. 42 months is 3.5 years. I think it's the 1,260 days. I got it? No, I think it is. Anyway, the 3.5 years is basically it's the same time as the sky refused to rain fall down with rain in the time of Elijah. These are the, I will commission my 2 witnesses to prophesy for those 1,260 days wearing sackcloth. These are the, and that gives you a reminder of Jonah preaching in Nineveh. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. So, olive trees, which give food and provide oil for the lamps, right? And wood. The 2 olive trees, the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone wants to harm them, fire comes out of their mouths and devours their enemies. In this way, anyone wanting to harm them is sure to be slain. They have the power to close up the sky so that no rain can fall during the time of their prophesying. Elijah. They also have power to turn water into blood and to afflict the earth with any plague as often as they wish. Plagues of Egypt. When they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will wage war against them and conquer them and kill them. So the beast that comes up from the abyss, so first the locust came up and then the beast will come up, which we normally think of as Satan, but there's a couple of beasts here in Revelation. Their corpses will lie in the main street of the great city, which has the symbolic names Sodom and Egypt, where indeed their Lord was crucified. So Jesus wasn't crucified in neither Sodom nor Egypt, but in a sense, the relationship with God was crucified in both places. So Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities that were destroyed because of their mistreatment or abuse of visitors, and then Egypt, the place that enslaved the Israelites, both of them turned against the will of God and followed their own way, in which case both of them, in a sense, crucified the Lord's people, or the Lord. Those from every people, tribe, tongue, and nation. Again, we don't just say every people, it's always kind of include them all. People, tribe, tongue, and nation. So pick how you want to classify people and include them all. Will gaze on their corpses for 3.5 days. They will not allow their corpses to be buried, which in the Middle East, for the Jewish people in particular, it's still true for the Muslims, and it's true in many other parts of the world. You bury someone the day they die. So for 3.5 days, they're not going to be allowed to be buried, which is a grave offense against society. The inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and be glad and exchange gifts because these 2 prophets tormented the inhabitants of the earth. How do they torment the inhabitants of the earth? By calling them to worship God. By calling them to worship God. But after the 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered them. So this is the Holy Spirit. And again, the dry bones coming up in Ezekiel. And of course, the resurrection of Jesus, but that is after 3 days, not 3.5. But after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them when they stood on their feet. So we see a shift here from future tense to past tense. And again, this is part of the eschatological problem. So John is seeing this vision, but now all of a sudden he's talking about it as it had already occurred. So the inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them, and they will be glad in the exchange of gifts because these 2 prophets tormented the inhabitants of the earth. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them. When they stood on their feet, great fear fell on those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven say to them, "Come up here." So they went up to heaven in a cloud as their enemies looked on. At that moment, there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell in ruins. 7,000 people. So 7, complete number, 1,000, everybody. So everybody, 7,000 people were killed during the earthquake. The rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. So there is finally a place where we see repentance. They were terrified, so they gave glory. And then the second woe has passed, but the third is coming soon. And that's where we're going to stop, because otherwise I'm ahead of where we were with the Spanish group. So let me get out of this, unmute you all, and get back to see if there's any more questions or comments, or give me a second. Okay, so everybody should be unmuted except those who don't want to be unmuted.
Yeah, I just want to, yeah, I want to ask a question, about these people that call themselves psychic. I've never been to one myself because I think it's a waste of time and money, even if I was the richest person in the world. But these people that go, these people that advertise when they, like, for example, just being in Jewel Osco, they call themselves spiritual advisors, and that they can give advice and they carry on like they really believe what they're saying. Is there anybody really in the world that is like that? I don't know if it's possible or not.
Most of them are good at reading faces and figuring out what they should be telling you based on how you respond. So they give you a vague enough answer, you give them more information unwittingly, and then they give you more of a prophecy.
Well, what was Moses?
Whether or not someone has the ability, that ability would come from God. So if it's going to be true, it's going to come from God. If it's not true, it's not coming from God. But the whole point of the whole point of psychics or spiritualists who are looking into your future, that is against the commandments. That is idolatry, because you're not trusting in God. You're putting your trust in something else or someone else.
What would we call Moses?
Moses is a prophet.
Okay. All
And
right.
Moses
That's
was
what I
given
wanted
the
to
Holy
see.
Spirit.
Okay.
And
All right.
Moses taught us that the way to test the prophecy is to see if it comes true. So Moses said, you won't know a prophet until the prophecy comes true, then you know it comes from God.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Elia, did you have something? Elia? No? Okay. Any other questions?
Question. I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
The 1/3 of the ocean and 1/3 of this and 1/3 of that, is there any significance to the number, or is it just does that mean a lot?
I think, well, the number is symbolic in the sense that it's meant to be a lot, but it's meant to compare against 1/4. So in the seals, 1/4 of things are destroyed, but with God, 1/3 of things are destroyed. So it's meant to kind of up the stakes. So and when we get to the bowls, get to the 7 bowls, then everything gets destroyed. But it ups the stakes one at a time. So start with 1/4, come up to 1/3, and then we get rid of it all.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I was trying to unmute everybody, and some people are muted back again. I don't know if that's of your own free will or not, but no? Well, obviously I'm clear as mud. That's great. Okay. Well, I haven't had one cookie yet, so I'm going to have some cookies. You guys have whatever you got at home, whether it's ice cream or cookies, and enjoy your evening. Today we had the reading for 2 Peter, and then Monday we'll have the readings at noon. Monday and Wednesday we'll have the readings at noon again, in English, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays in Spanish. And then the next Wednesday evening for the Bible study will continue on in the middle of chapter 11, going to chapter 12. I'll try not to move the ribbon so I know exactly where I am again, but I moved it for the readings the other day and messed myself up. And then I do have some bad news that I need to share with you. We're going to share it on a text, a flop note to everybody later. So I guess somebody complained to the Archdiocese, and I was called today by the bishop, so we cannot give out communion in the parking lot anymore. I was told specifically, and I said, well, I tried to explain that we were skirting the rules that they had put up, but I was told emphatically not to do it. So whoever made the complaint, they made the complaint, and so I can't give out communion anymore in the parking lot. Just so you know, unfortunately, I feel bad about that, but.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, that's how I felt, but anyway. So
Stupid.
we'll move forward from
No,
there.
somebody complained that he was giving communion. What a jerk.
So
Okay.
we'll
All
move
right.
forward. Okay, thank you, everybody. Good night. And again, so that's going to
Thank you, Father.
text message.
Okay,
Thank
good
you,
night.
Father.
You're welcome. My
Bye.
pleasure. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Right.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you.